Hello, and welcome to the 12th episode of Ghost Creatures and Scares Oh My.
A podcast where we share our love of the show Supernatural and dive into the fascinating and terrifying real life legends behind the ghosts and creatures featured in each episode of Supernatural.
This episode is called Reapers and Near Death Experiences, and we'll cover some spine tingling tales today.
So every week we cover one episode of Supernatural. We dive into the related kind of folklore and backstories into the entity or the creature that's featured in that particular episode. So it feels a bit strange being back. It's been a good few weeks since we've recorded one of these episodes.
Yeah, enjoying a nice time off over Christmas.
Yeah, we hope you've all had a lovely winter break, whatever you've been up to with family and friends. It's been a busy one, hasn't it?
It has, yeah, really busy.
I think even though we have time off, it feels like this because it's so much packed into it, like seeing family, friends, and other things. It's just really tiring. So it's lovely to be back. So we're looking at episode 12 of season 1 of Supernatural, and the episode is called Faith.
So, in this episode, whilst fighting the monster, Dean ends up being electrocuted and suffers a heart attack. After Sam receives a call from one of the dad's friends, the brothers go to visit a healer in Nebraska called Roy. Reluctant at first to believe, the healer puts their hands on Dean. He collapses and sees an old man standing behind the healer. When Sam and Dean go to visit the hospital to find out if Dean's cured, they find out that at the exact same time that Dean was cured, another man had a heart attack. They discover that every time Roy heals someone, another person dies of the exact same ailment. Dean realizes that the old man he saw was a Reaper, a creature that brings death and can only be seen at the moment it claims a life. It transpires that Roy's wife is calling upon the Reaper to swap places with those he deems worthy, like Dean, to live, and then substitutes them with others.
So they say that you can only really be certain of two things in life, death and taxes. Death is a fact of life, but it's a subject we often avoid until we really have to face it. Often feared due to the finality of death and the unknown of what, if anything, comes after. As humans, we have attempted to rationalize and explain death since we have had the awareness to do so, attributing ideas such as afterlife and spirits to the concept. Religions are often built around the idea of where our souls go after we die, and cultures handle or understand death in starkly different ways. Today, we're going to explore the idea of death as a figure, the Grim Reaper, amongst other creatures, and we'll discuss those who are close to death being more susceptible to visitors of the ghostly kind, as well as some fascinating near death experiences. So, before we dive into that, I think it is interesting that bef- as soon as humans and mankind could rationalize things, or maybe as early as cave paintings, really, we wondered what happens when we die. And what we wanted, I think religions were built up, okay, around morality as well, and trying to keep people in order. But religions were very much a place for us to, we're not going to die forever kind of thing, because
Yeah,
it's a terrifying thought.
it is, yeah. That once you're gone, you're gone.
Yes,
Something not many people would want to believe to be the case.
yeah, because I mean we are. It's hard. I'm agnostic, so I find it difficult. I'm so jealous of people who've got unshakable faith. But anyway, we're kind of digressing a bit there. Basically, we're going to be looking at the Grim Reaper as an idea, but also we're going to look at people who've seen things because they're close to death, which I find really fascinating. And
Hmm.
there's a really interesting story at the end. That's quite a well-known one when it comes to near-death experiences. But yeah, I thought I put it in there because it is a really, really interesting one. So the Grim Reaper. For many years, the personification of death has manifested as the Grim Reaper, a skeletal figure, often hooded and carrying a scythe. He will present himself to those who are close to death or who have passed and will guide their souls to the afterlife. Sometimes he is a passive creature without control over the death, and in some beliefs, he chooses and collects his victims. So, before we dive into different cultures, I think it's really interesting how the Grim Reaper, that idea is massively seeped into pop culture. He's in The Simpsons, he's in loads of different cartoons. For some
Yeah.
reason, The Simpsons is the only one I can think.
It's
You can
because
tell I'm
Homer,
tired.
it's because Homer becomes him.
That's right. But isn't he in Futurama as well? I do have other references other than Matt Groening, but for some reason,
I don't know, is he in Futurama?
there's another cartoon that he's in as well. Like I
Probably
can't
Family Guy. I wouldn't be
Family
surprised.
Guy potentially. But it's always that comical kind of. He's coming. You know, if someone's accidentally became death and they have to
Uh,
carry out. But
there's
anyway,
quite a few different takes on him,
there
isn't there?
is in different films and
I
things.
quite enjoy Supernaturals though because although
Hmm.
Death is sort of the Grim Reaper,
Yeah,
but he has lots of Reapers doing his jobs for him. Instead of it sort of
that would make
being one
sense.
main guy who's going around doing it all, he's got like
Yeah.
loads of Reapers doing it for him.
I find it interesting because have you ever seen the film Meet Joe Black with Brad Pitt and Anthony Hopkins?
I think so,
It's
yeah.
brilliant. It's the idea that it's not really the God and devil. It's actually death. Is just death. He's not bad. He's not good. He's just there doing a job. He's not evil. It's just he comes to get you when your time's up. And I think that's quite maybe more
Such a
unsettling.
cheery way to come back, this,
It
isn't it?
really is Happy New Year, everyone. But I didn't do this on purpose. It's just the way the episode fell. So anyway, let's dive into some different cultures and how they perceive the Grim Reaper, if they perceive it as the Grim Reaper at all. So in Latin America, death is often represented as a female figure, Our Lady of Death, having inspired Day of the Dead festivities. Can I just interject here? I've watched Coco for the first time this year, and it's absolutely brilliant. What a brilliant film! It features, it's all about Day of the Dead, and it's amazing. So that just brought that to mind. So it's a day where the deceased members of a family are honoured through feasting and elaborate costumes. Whereas in Haitian or Hoodoo beliefs, it is Baron Samedi who will lead you into the afterlife. Gaelic lore also involves a female spirit known as Banshee, who heralds the death of a person by shrieking or keening. The Banshee is often described as wearing red or green, usually with long, dishevelled hair. She can appear in a variety of forms, typically that of an ugly, frightful hag, but in some stories she chooses to appear young and beautiful. Some tales recount that the creature was actually a ghost, often of a specific murdered woman or a mother who died in childbirth. When several banshees appear at once, it is said to indicate the death of someone great or holy. We mentioned banshees before in Irish culture.
Yeah,
I think it's just really interesting.
yeah.
And I think I mentioned this as well, but I was listening to a podcast once where it was talking about the banshee or banshees. And apparently, that she's been there when there's little combs left around because she sits on top of the roof and combs her hair.
That's a horrible thought, isn't it?
Isn't it? Imagine having to comb your hair when you're dead or a ghost. Be a bit of a nightmare. I take my tangle tease out. In In ancient Egyptian lore, it is Anubis, the canine-headed god of the dead, amongst other roles, who feature in tales of the afterlife and their sacred rituals. Depicted as a protector of graves as early as the First Dynasty, Anubis was also an embalmer. By the Middle Kingdom, he was replaced by Osiris in his role as Lord of the Underworld. One of his prominent roles was as a god who ushered souls into the afterlife. He attended the weighing scale during the weighing of the heart, in which it was determined whether a soul would be allowed to enter the realm of the dead. So that's where they have this scale, and on one side is a feather, and the other side's your heart.
Yeah,
And like theoretically, the heart would always be heavier, but actually, if you're a really pure person, the feather would be heavier. I think.
yeah, and you get to go to heaven.
Yeah, that's a scary thought. The way I put weight on over Christmas. In ancient Greek religion and Greek mythology, death, or Thanatos, did I say that right?
I think so.
Is one of the twin sons of Nyx, Night. Thanatos takes the shade of the deceased to the near shore of the river Styx, where the ferryman, Charon, now is it Sharon? I feel like I'm saying Sharon.
Charon,
Charon.
Chiron,
Chiron. Are you sure? Can I just call it,
Karen. I would say Karen.
Karen? It can't be Karen.
Karen.
I'm going to stick with Sharon. Right, we've just had to pause there and just double check. Apparently it's Haron, so I do apologise for butchering that. But anyway, so the deceased are on the shore of the river Styx, where the ferryman Haron, on payment of a small fee, basically conveys the soul to Hades into the realm of the dead. So that I love that backstory, and it makes me think of Hercules.
Yeah.
I've got lots of like very babyish references today, Coco, Hercules, but no, but the idea of the river Styx having to pay the ferryman, and there's that film, isn't there? It's part of the Conjuring franchise where I think it's Annabelle, but not the first Annabelle film, where it's basically Ed and Lorraine Warren have went off and they've left the daughter with a babysitter, and there's this one of the ghosts is the ferryman. He's got two coins in his eyes because that's what he used to pay them, the ferryman.
Is that not
It's
is that not
definitely
Annabelle? Is that not
It's
Annabelle?
Annabelle, but it's not the original Annabelle with Annabelle Wallis in. It's not her. It's not the one with the couple and the baby. It's the Annabelle origin, I think. But anyway, we digress there. So we've covered ancient Egyptian, Latin, we've covered Gaelic, Greek. Really quickly, we'll have a little look at Scandinavian before we have a look at the where actually the more kind of popular universal idea of the Grim Reaper comes from. And then we're going to dive into some real life stories. So in Scandinavia, Norse mythology personified death in the shape of Hel, the goddess of death and ruler over the realm of the same name, where she received a portion of the dead. In the times of the Black Plague, Death would often be depicted as an old woman known by the name of Pester, meaning plague hag, wearing a black hood. She would go into town carrying either a rake or a broom. If she brought the rake, some people would survive the plague. But if she brought the broom, however, everyone would die. Oh God, Jim, she's got the bloody broom.
Run!
So, the origin of the Grim Reaper figure comes from medieval Europe during the 14th century, when more and more Europeans found themselves dying of the mysterious new plague known as Black Death, now known as bubonic plague. The Grim Reaper embodied the concept of the living people being actually like wheat, which the Reaper harvests when they grow too old, hence the Reaper's scythe. So, like a farmer would cut down the wheat when it gets too old or too, I don't know, damaged, I suppose, if someone's ill and weak.
It's a weird way of looking at it, isn't it?
It is, but it makes sense as to why, when you think about it, this is where it came from, the black hood, and you know what I mean?
Yeah, the scythe mainly.
Yeah, it's a bit like when you think about actually, it makes me think of maybe more the 1600s, the plague in England, where they had the plague doctors with the big beaks,
Yeah.
because they wore similar outfits, didn't they? That would be quite terrifying. So death is a key aspect of most religions, and in Christianity, death is represented as one of the four horsemen of the apocalypse. Although death, the pale horse, represents widespread death rather than individual passing. When a person dies, Christians believe that their soul either ascends to heaven or is doomed to hell based on their actions of life. They might even find themselves in limbo if they aren't baptized or have unfinished business. The idea of angels is also prevalent in Christianity, and angels look over us whilst we are alive in the form of guardian angels. The afterlife and its origins vary from culture to culture and from religion to religion. Hindus believe in reincarnation, that the soul passes to another body after death, and based on how good of a life the person has led, they will eventually lead their way to their final resting place. What most religions have in common is the idea that your actions on earth determine where your soul ends up after death. So that is really, really key. I think that all of these religions seem to have the same thread of what you do here on earth will affect what happens to you after.
Yeah, it's to drive people to be good, isn't it?
I personally believe that because some people would argue, oh, well, it must all be real because how did, before the internet and all of that kind of thing, how did everyone from such different parts of the world have the same idea? Well, everyone's just trying to keep law and order, really,
Yeah.
aren't they?
I don't think like it could very well be real, it might not be real, but
Hmm.
either way, it was these sort of points were forced
Hmm.
into every single one to sort of say you've got to be good in society, don't be
Hmm.
bad, follow these types of rules, no killing and all that sort of thing.
And that's why, as well as science and more access to information, our generation has went away from religion because we fear, well, if we kill someone, where would we end up? Prison,
Ah,
which is terrifying to us, the idea of being locked away. In them days, years and years ago, would you be that threatened by being even executed if you've got a pretty rubbish
probably
life?
more so back in them days, like
So, well,
kill someone, you get killed.
yeah, but if you think about it, it wasn't as I don't think it would be as terrifying as it is now to be executed.
I
So
mean, it was a bit harder to be fair back then, maybe so, because there wasn't like now you can if you go out and do something bad, about 50,000 security cameras will catch you doing it.
that's not the point I'm trying to make. What I'm saying is, in them nowadays, to be locked away for life or to be executed is the worst thing that could happen. But in them days, life and death was a bit more precarious anyway. They could die from the plague the next day. So the idea of them being punished for eternity in hell, it had more impact,
Yeah.
is what I'm trying to say. And I think it's really interesting the idea of reincarnation. I love that idea that you could come back as something else entirely and have to work your way to this ultimate goal of heaven or whatever the equivalent is.
What happens if you've been really bad though and you come back as like a bug?
Yeah, well, obviously that would be bad. God, what would we come back as? I think I'm all right.
Come back as a cat.
That'd be pretty good. 9 lives,
Uh,
wandering around. Dog would be better. Or dog. God, come back as
yeah,
Milo.
king.
So we're going to dive into some stories now. So I thought I found some real life stories, if you believe them, of people who think they've seen the Grim Reaper, or like you were saying before, Matty, his workers.
Yeah,
So I got this from mysteriousuniverse.com. I'm going to read it to you, see what you think about it. At night when she was in bed, Mom would see a person walk from the highway in a red glow until it got to her bedroom. It would come through the walls and approach her side of the bed. It had a long black hat that came down to a point and glowing red eyes. On February the 2nd, my mum went to the hospital with a high heart rate and low blood pressure. Telltale signs of heart failure. She came back on 2 days later. She came back, sorry, 2 days later and was all right. She had her favourite dinner that evening and watched her favourite programmes. My brother and I came to spend the night once more. Then around 3:47 in the morning, she hollered because she saw that entity again in her room. My brother and I went in, but nothing was there. The following morning, my brother picked them up for dialysis, but by the time they made it 300 feet from the house, my mother had passed away in the vehicle. They got her to the Marquette Hospital once more, where the neurologist had said she had no brain function, and she was gone. Now I think of the creature my brother and I saw at a local cemetery while driving by it one night. It was large and had tattered cloth on it. It was standing atop a freshly done grave. Though I know what my brother and I had seen for that split second was the Grim Reaper, I can't figure out what my mother had been seeing all those nights. So that's pretty much a story of a woman who eventually did die, and she was pretty much saying to her family, I keep seeing these creatures that keep coming back for us. And if you look at these stories from around the world, they tend to have the same features. Some of them have red eyes, the
Hmm.
black shadows, a lot of them wear hats. They're like they're not real like people. Ghosts of like imagine a ghost of a person.
Yeah.
They're like little funny shadowy people or creatures.
Yeah.
They're
It
terrifying.
is weird.
There's also a report from a woman calling herself Ashley Dawn, who claims that her grandmother had spoken of seeing apparitions of a hooded figure in the year leading up to her death from pneumonia. Ashley did not believe these stories at first, dismissing them as the rantings of an old woman. That is until she saw something strange for herself one evening. The witness explains what happened next. I turned and saw it beside my bed. There stood a small dark figure, about 3 feet in height, wearing a black cloak with a hood, no face, about 2 feet from my face. It looked like a small Grim Reaper without the blade. I was in shock, but not scared. I looked at it for about a minute, and then it turned, glided out of my room, and I got out of my bed and followed it down the hall to my grandmother's room, where it faded away. Thoughts?
It was only 3 foot tall. Literally all I can picture is like a Jawa off Star
I
Wars
was thinking of that,
with a little
and I don't even
face.
have Star Wars references to hand.
Just imagine that.
There's an easy explanation for this one. I'm going to be Mrs. Skeptical, but night terrors
Uh,
because I've experienced this. My sister used to have night terrors. I don't think she still does, but and I don't I wouldn't want to say what she experienced because I'm not 100% sure and she'll probably tell me off. But I know a lot of people who have night terrors. It's this you wake up screaming, but because you've been paralyzed in your sleep, you think that you've seen something in the corner of your room, and it
yeah.
tends to be a shadow, like because that's what your brain would see, I suppose. And it happened to me once where I woke up and I was wide awake, but I couldn't move. And and it's funny she says 3 foot because I was in bed and it was at my eye length. Eye height, sorry.
For your eye, actually, that was going to be about 1 foot.
That was a little baby one. But yeah, anyway, and it disappeared as soon as I moved. So I know for a fact it wasn't anything supernatural. It was a trick of the brain. I think that's what it is. But then again, why is it happening to people who are at the end of their life or coming close to death?
Which he wasn't. That was towards our grandma's room. So these first few stories have been for people who
Mhm.
aren't. It's the relatives that are.
Yeah, no, but the first one, the man was seeing it. The brother and sister saw it as
That
well.
was the
It could be
grim
stress,
end.
couldn't it? If you're like stressed to bits because a family member's poorly
Yeah,
ill, then I think stress triggers night terrors, 100%.
yeah.
Deathbed phenomena. However, not all deathbed visions are dark and negative. Deathbed phenomena was a term coined by a physician named William Barrett in 1926 in his book Deathbed Visions, where he collated anecdotes of people who claimed to have witnessed their dying relatives seeing people who others couldn't just before they passed. There are lots of theories about this phenomena, such as the brain's neurological system shutting down and causing people to see visions and hear things. However, many choose to believe that when an individual is close to their death, the veil between this world and the next is at its thinnest, and long dead relatives, friends, even pets can come to collect the person and escort them into the afterlife. That is such a lovely thing to think. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
You know what? I don't really want to blast this one apart because yes, it probably is. When you're dying, you are going to think of your loved ones, and you're probably going to think of loved ones who aren't here anymore. Potentially, like your mum or something, if you're an older person, or dad, or dead relatives, pets. Oh, it's so sad. So potentially that is your brain's going to reach for that and think you see things. But wouldn't it be lovely if that was true?
What a lovely thought.
Matty doesn't like talking about things like this. So we'll move on. This one's called Mother's Deathbed Vision. So I'm totally changing the subject for you, Matty. And this
Gets
one
better and
is
better, yeah.
it's liveabout.com. Well, you are doing a podcast called Ghost Creatures and Scares. So it's got to be, we'll have to dive into some darker stuff. My mother had been in and out of hospitals over the last year, near death at each admission. She was coherent and not delusional. She had congestive heart failure and lung and kidney cancer spread throughout her body. One morning in the hospital room about 2 a.m., when all was quiet, my mother stayed out of the door at her room and into the hall that led to the nurse's station and the other patients' rooms. Mum, what do you see? I said. Don't you see them? She said. They walk the hall day and night. They are dead. She said this with quiet calmness. The revelation of this statement might send fear into some, but my mother and I had seen spiritual visions many years prior, so this statement was not a shock for me to hear or for her to see. This time, however, I did not see them. Her surgeon said that there was no point in treatment as the cancer had spread throughout her body. He said she might have 6 months to live, at the most, maybe 3 months. I brought her home to die. The night of her passing, she was restless and anxious. A few minutes before 8 p.m., she said, I have to go. They're here. They're waiting for me. Her face glowed and the colour returned to her pale face as she attempted to raise herself and stand up. Her last words were, I have to go. It is beautiful. And then she passed at 8 p.m. Several months later, my alarm clock, set at 6 p.m., which was broken and had no batteries in it, went off at 8 p.m. I could feel the presence of my mother and her amusement at achieving such a task and bringing it to my attention. A year and 2 months of the day of my mother's transformation, she appeared standing in the kitchen as whole, healthy, and young. I was surprised, knowing she was dead, but so happy to see her. We embraced in a hug, and I said, I love you, and then she was gone. She had come back to say a final goodbye and to let me know that she was happy and okay. I know my mother is finally home and at peace. And that is from Moon's sister.
Gonna need to pick me up after this, like.
I don't want to discredit this story because it's very sensitive, but mm-mm, I don't believe this one. I think it's a lovely story, lovely and sad, but I don't believe this one.
Yeah.
I could get on board with the alarm clock thing because I think ghosts do, if you believe in ghosts, I'm massively on the fence. They can sometimes interfere with electronics, but to see the man lovely and whole and just standing there as a ghost.
She maybe came down to see her.
Maybe, and when people die, of terrible diseases like cancer, they're not going to. I don't think they're all of a sudden going to be. It's a bit misleading to say that to people. I think I'm a bit on the cautious with this one, but we'll do one more of these, and then we're all gonna bring the tone up a bit with a more light-hearted. Well, it's
Well, we'll see. We'll see, yeah.
right. Okay, Dad's dying visions. This
Oh,
isn't. This isn't it. This is. God, I feel like I've started off the year on a really light
yeah,
visions.
I flipping it.
Has everyone got a glass of brandy to hand? Um, Back in 1979, I moved in with my dying father. One morning, I was making him breakfast and he seemed very upset. I asked him what was wrong. He said, They came to get me last night and pointed towards the ceiling. Stupid me, I asked who. He got extremely upset and yelled at me, pointing at the ceiling. They came to get me. I didn't say another thing, but watched him continuously. From that night on, he wouldn't sleep in his room. He always slept on the couch. I would put my own children to bed, then sit with him and watch TV. We would talk, and right in the middle of our conversation, he'd look up, wave his hand, and say, Go away! Not yet. I'm not ready. This went on for 3 months before he died. My father and I were extremely close, so when he contacted me by automatic writing, I wasn't surprised. He just wanted to say that he was all right. One more thing. He died at 7 a.m. That night I was all alone in his home. I lit a big candle, put it on the end table, and lay down on the couch and cried myself to sleep. I felt so close to him there. The next morning, when I awoke, the candle sat 3 feet away on the carpeted floor. By the look of the burn hole on the carpet right below the end table, the candle had fallen and started a fire. To this day, I don't know how it was put out or how the candle got moved to the doorway between the living room and the kitchen, but I suspect it was my dad. He saved my life that night and his home from burning up in a fire, and that's from a user called Kutala. So that's more believable, I think, that one.
That's a little bit nicer, I suppose. Saved his life.
That's it, I think. And I think as well, it'd be lovely to think that you could come back and send a message to your loved one from beyond the grave, you know. So, what we've covered the Grim Reaper, we've covered different ideas of death in religions and across different cultures and continents. And then we had a little look at like these Reaper creatures that come back. Before we go to the last story, which is near-death experiences, what's your thoughts on the Grim Reaper and people seeing family members before they pass, that kind of thing?
It's a nice thought, isn't it?
Hmm.
And hopefully it's the case.
It would be believable that before you die, that there is that thinning of the veil, that you're more susceptible to see things that aren't here. If
Maybe
you're,
give you a little bit of peace of mind before you go.
yeah, exactly. A hug. So another really interesting one, which I think, and when I say light-hearted, it's because when you talk about near-death experiences, it's people who have miraculously survived these experiences, but they've come back to tell the tale. People die, they don't come back. Generally that's the
Well, that
rule.
is generally the rule, isn't it?
So we
Unless
don't
there's
know.
zombies,
Well, yeah, and we
and
don't,
then we've got a whole new problem.
and zombies can't talk. So we don't know what happens, what they've witnessed and what they've seen, who they've seen. So I find it so fascinating with these people who've nearly died and they've come back and they've said, yeah, I've seen a light, I've seen people, this is what happens. This is why I put this at the very end, because I think this is really fascinating. And I think I'm going to end on a really good story. So bear with us. It's quite a long one because it's from her own point of view. Some of it, sorry, is from her own point of view. So it's the case of Pam Reynolds. Have you heard of this one?
Possibly,
It's
but I can't
probably the
think.
most well-known near-death experience. So lastly, some people are fortunate enough to return from the brink of death itself and often return with some unbelievable tales. People talk about having seen relatives who have long passed, seeing bright lights, and feeling an overwhelming sense of being at peace before being jolted back into their earthly bodies. One of the most fascinating cases that has continued to perplex even the most skeptical people is the case of Pam Reynolds. Pam Reynolds was an American singer-songwriter from Atlanta, Georgia, USA, whose near-death experience, we're going to call that NDE, is one of the most frequently cited. The experience seemingly occurred during a complete shutdown of her brain and body functions that had been instigated purposely to allow delicate surgery on a brain aneurysm. It included accurate views of the operating room and equipment, hyper awareness, visions of light, and interactions with deceased relatives. Her case is regarded by many as convincing evidence of survival, since her vital signs were monitored continuously, providing certainty that she was clinically dead at the time. In 1991, aged 35, Reynolds experienced symptoms of dizziness, loss of speech, and difficulty moving her body. A CT scan revealed a giant aneurysm at the base of her brain. This is going to freak me out because I have massive health anxiety, don't I? So my little brain's already ticking, thinking, oh, have I felt
I've got
dizzy?
this. I've got this. It's going to be a sleepless night tonight.
I'm 31. I'm a singer-songwriter. Anyway, so a CT scan revealed that she had a giant aneurysm at the base of her brain. The neurologist to whom she was referred predicted little or no chance of survival because of its size and location. Regular neurosurgical techniques to excise it wouldn't work. She was then referred to Dr. Robert Spetzler in Phoenix, Arizona, who had pioneered a surgical procedure that would make the aneurysm operable. This involved cooling the patient's body to 60 degrees Fahrenheit, stopping the heartbeat and breathing, and draining all of the blood from her brain. So that it was really groundbreaking surgery at the time. Cooling her body to that level and draining all the blood from her body and stopping her heartbeat and breathing. She was clinically dead.
That's what I'm saying. Essentially killing her.
Well, yeah, killing her to cure her, you
Yeah.
know. More than 20 doctors, nurses, and technicians took part. The operation required Reynolds' vital signs and body temperature to be very closely monitored by multiple instruments placed in various locations on and within her body. Molded speakers were placed in her ears, producing clicks at regular intervals so that other instruments could detect her brain's reactions to them. Reynolds was awake when she was brought into the operating room at 7:15 a.m. She felt a loss of time and blanked out as the general anesthesia took effect. Then she became aware of a musical tone that seemed to pull her out of the top of her head. The further I got out of my body, the more clear the tone became. I had the impression it was like a road, a frequency that you go on. I remember seeing several things in the operating room when I was looking down. It was the most aware that I think I've ever been in my entire life. It was brighter and more focused and clearer than normal vision. There was so much in the operating room that I didn't recognise, and so many people. She recalled being surprised that the team had only partially shaved her head. She also recalled seeing the bone saw that Spetzler used to excise a section of her skull. So just to put in there, she is clinically dead at this point. She should not be seeing any of these things. And they hadn't brought these instruments. The doctor had deliberately hadn't shown her this horrible bone saw before she went under because knew it would freak her out.
Yeah.
So she should not be seeing these things. The saw, the saw thing, whatever it was, looked like an electric toothbrush and it had a dent in it, a groove at the top where the saw appeared to go into the handle. But it didn't, and the saw had interchangeable blades too, but these blades were in what looked like a socket wrench case. I heard the saw crank up. She found this sound unpleasant. Someone said something about my veins and arteries being very small, Reynolds recalled, adding that it was a female voice. At this stage in the operation, a female cardiac surgeon, having determined that the arteries in Reynolds' right leg were too small to handle the degree of blood flow required by the heart-lung machine, opened the left leg as well. Spetzler assessed the aneurysm and ordered hypothermic cardiac arrest to be performed. Commencing at 10:50 a.m., blood was removed via tubes from the femoral arteries and veins, chilled in reservoir cylinders, and returned to her body. Its Reynolds core temperature fell, her heartbeat changed to fibrillation, then stopped entirely. Her brainwaves flattened, then as her core temperature reached 60, the brainstem shut down. By standard definitions, she was clinically dead. Sorry, I'll correct myself. Before, when she said she saw this saw, she was under anesthesia, so she was knocked out. You would not be seeing this if you were knocked out.
Hmm.
Then she was clinically dead, and she still continues to see things. So either way, dead or knocked out, you're not going to be able to see what's going on. She did because she was above her own body. At 11:25, the heart-lung machine was turned off. The operating table was tilted and blood was drained from her body. The sac of the aneurysm, now empty, was easily excised. The heart-lung machine was then reactivated and warm. Oh God, sorry, this is making me feel really sick. And then I've,
Your nightmare.
I've got
That's
a real bad thing with circulation. Oh, this is awful. The heart-lung machine was then reactivated and warmed blood reinfused into Reynolds. So, I can't do it. God, I feel the devil being made to read the Bible. I'm
maybe
gonna
this is your hell.
I'm going to burn in a minute. The heart-lung machine was then reactivated and warmed blood, bon appetit, reinfused into Reynolds' circulatory system. God, I'm sorry. At noon, it became apparent that her heart would not resume beating by warming alone, so electrical jolts from a defibrillator were used to shock it into starting. Having been clinically dead for about an hour, Reynolds was returned to the recovery room in a stable condition at 2:10 p.m.
Jolts.
Sorry, I know, you might know this. I've said this before. Sometimes reading aloud, I do get a bit tongue-tied, especially when this is like a doctor's manual. I feel so.
Very in detail.
I'm really trying my best, and the warmed blood really put me off. All I can hear in my brain now is warm blood, warm blood, warm blood. Don't. There was a sensation like being pulled, but not against your will. I was going on my own accord because I wanted to go. I have different metaphors to try to explain this. It was like the Wizard of Oz, being taken up in a tornado vortex, only you're not spinning around like you've got vertigo. You're very focused and you have a place to go. The feeling was like going up in an elevator really fast, and there was a sensation, but it wasn't a bodily, physical sensation. It was like a tunnel, but it wasn't a tunnel. So what is it,
So what is
Pam?
it then?
At some point very early in the tunnel vortex, I became aware of my grandmother calling me, but I didn't hear her call me with my ears. It was a clearer hearing than with ears. I trust that sense more than I trust my own ears. The feeling was that she wanted me to come to her, so I continued with no fear down the shaft. It's a dark shaft that I went through, and at the very end there was a very little tiny pinpoint of light that kept getting bigger, bigger, and bigger. The light was incredibly bright, like sitting in the middle of a light bulb. It was so bright that I could not put my hands in front of my face fully, except expecting to see them, and I could not. But I knew they were there. Not from a sense of touch. Again, it's terribly hard to explain, but I knew they were there. I noticed that as I began to discern different figures in the light, and they were all covered in light, they were light and had light permeating all around them, they began to form shapes I could recognize and understand. excuse me, I could see that one of them was my grandmother. I don't know if it was reality or projection, but I would know my grandmother, the sound of her anytime, anywhere. Everyone I saw looking back on it fit perfectly into my understanding of what that person looked like at their best during their lives. That's nice to know that if this is true, when you do pass over, it's a good version of you, not in the way you've passed.
Maybe you get to choose.
Yeah, like an avatar kind of thing.
Uh, Pick which one you want to look like.
Which one would you choose?
Dunno.
I'm gonna go for 21, maybe.
Around then's probably a good age, isn't it?
Yeah, I recognise a lot of people. My Uncle Gene was there, so was my great aunt even, Maggie, who was really a cousin. On Papa's side of the family, my grandfather was there as well. They were specifically taking care of me, looking after me. They would not permit me to go any further. It was communicated to me that's the best thing way I know how to say it, because they didn't speak like I'm speaking. That if I went all the way into the light, something would happen to me physically. Sorry, I've bluffed that a little bit. Basically, what I'm taking from that is, even though she's seen them all and they're happy to be there, they're pretty much saying to her, "Don't come any closer, because if you come to this light, you are physically going to die, and there's no going back." They would be unable to put me back into this body, like I had gone too far and they couldn't reconnect me. So they wouldn't let me go anywhere or do anything. But then I got to the end of it and saw the thing, my body. I didn't want to get into it. It looked terrible, like a train wreck. It looked like what it was, dead. I believed it was covered. It scared me and I didn't want to look at it. It was communicated to me that it was like jumping into a swimming pool. No problem, just jump right into the swimming pool. I didn't want to, but I guess I was late or something because he, the uncle, pushed me. I felt a definite repelling and at the same time a pulling from the body. The body was pulling and the tunnel was pushing. It was like diving into a pool of ice water. It hurt. The assistants finished the operation to the sound of rock music, Reynolds recalled. They were playing Hotel California, and the line was, "You can check out any time you like, but you never can leave." I mentioned this later to Dr. Brown, that was incredibly insensitive, and he told me that I needed to sleep more. When I regained consciousness, I was still on the respirator even. After her experience, Reynolds lost all fear of death. She said, as quoted in MSNBC broadcast, "If death is the worst thing that happens to us, what an incredible thing. If at the end of our lives this is what's going to happen to everyone, I don't see the problem. I really don't get it. I fear pain, but I don't fear death." Pam Reynolds recovered fully from the operation and lived a healthy life until 2010, where she died aged 53 from heart failure. So the surgeons afterwards, the reason that this case is so even skeptics can't um kind of refute it is that the surgeons were saying she would not have been to hear that music playing, she wouldn't have been to see the saw, she couldn't have possibly known about. There was a few comments made that she mentioned that, but the arteries that was mentioned when she was well under
Yeah.
and apparently as well, like it did look like an electrical toothbrush, and she just wouldn't have known that. It wasn't They didn't have the internet to hand in 1991 and things like that. So what's your thoughts on this?
It's very compelling. The fact that just described everything pretty spot on.
Hmm.
Um, it'd be hard to argue against it, really, isn't it?
I do think as well, just the fact that the surgeons have said there's absolutely no way this woman would have been to tell you these things unless this she was out of her body. And I think it all adds up to me, because if you can imagine, I don't know why, but when I imagine life after death in these situations, you do imagine a kind of, you'd have to kind of jump back in your own body to get back in, kind of thing, if that makes sense. The body would be pulling you back, but then that light would be pulling you, so it's like a push and pulling sensation.
Yeah.
Strange, isn't it? I mean, have you ever heard of any other stories like this?
None that I can think of. I mean, we'll probably come across some on Netflix somewhere along the thousands of documentaries that we've watched, but nothing so
Yeah.
compelling.
So it's one that I wanted to cover, and I think based on going back to the very start of the episode, Dean's situation where he's in hospital and he has that heart attack and he gets that second chance. It's good, and it would be lovely to think that when our time comes, this is what happens, that your loved ones come to collect you and it's peaceful, you know?
Such a lovely, lovely
So
thought.
you get really like triggered by this, don't you? And you also hate the word triggered.
I do.
So thanks so much for listening to us bubbling our way through this episode of Ghost Creatures and Scares Oh My.
Please make sure to leave us a review and let us know what you thought of today's episode. Feedback will really help us out, and we really want to know your thoughts to help us hone our podcast.
Make sure to follow us on Instagram at Ghost Creatures and Scares with My. That's where I share most content. I do try my best to keep it updated as often as possible. It'd be great to have some more followers. You could also email us at ghostcreaturesandscares@gmail.com if you've got any supernatural tales you'd like us to read out on the show. So thanks so much again. We'll be back next week to dive into spooky tales of haunted vehicles and cursed ships.
Have a great week. Hello, and welcome to the 12th episode of Ghost Creatures.